I'm just going to introduce the panel to you. I'm sure many of them are familiar to you. Liz Manson is Community Planning Managers. You're the chair of
the Scottish Community Planning Network.
Great, thank you. And Jim Grant is the Heads of Planning Scotland Association. And Alan Morrison is from the Society of Chief Officers of Environmental Health in Scotland. That trips off the tongue very easily, Alan. Then we're also joined by Tom Welsh, is the Integration Manager, Midlothian Health and Social Care Partnership. And last but not least, we're joined by Pamela Smith from the Scottish Local Authorities Economic Development Group. We all need to get catchier phrases for our associations. But I think it's incredibly important that all of the associations are here, so thank you for coming along today. I think the panel were instructed to just share some reflections as briefly as they could in terms of today's discussion about the public health priorities. So I was going to probably do ladies first, I thought, if that was okay with the gents. So I was going to just invite Liz and then Pamela, and then we'd go down the gents. And then just open it up for a bit of a discussion with the panel members and for you to kind of share your thoughts as well. Is that okay? Great, okay. Liz, start with you.
Thank you. 4 points to highlight from the discussions today. Community planning managers, I think, very much welcome this whole systems approach and the health of the public rather than public health being the sort of theme. But interestingly, although I appreciate today is about local government, it's important to remember that there are 5 organisations that have exactly the same statutory duty for community planning. And I think one of the themes today has been the importance of third sector and communities and individuals themselves. I think that thought is something just to bear in mind as we're continuing the discussion. Secondly, the importance of inclusion and equality has been one of the themes throughout today. And the LOIPs, as I'm sure you all know, and the Fairer Scotland duty highlight these principles pervade everything. And certainly welcome the statement in the Public Health Principles document that the priorities are interrelated and interdependent, because it's not just about the economy where fairness is an important concept. Thirdly, I think certainly the discussions at our table highlighted that a local focus is essential, particularly in terms of looking at inequality, because the patterns are so different across the 32 CPP areas, and particularly I think between urban and rural areas where the pattern of poverty and deprivation is quite starkly different. Community planning partnerships certainly understand their position for their area because of the LOIPs, and so something about looking and building from that local focus. And finally, we already have a cluttered landscape of partnerships, and as Angela said in her opening address, community planning partnerships already have the key players and the stakeholders around their table. So if we can ensure that local community planning partnerships set up or perhaps adapt appropriate partnerships for this agenda, and just finishing with the plea about just don't make us set up a new one, but perhaps allow community planning partnerships to reflect what's right for their area.
Great. Thank you. Pamela?
Thank you. I'm taking a slightly different focus on this in terms of socioeconomic factors are some of the biggest determinants of health. And from an economic development perspective, we're really keen to start looking at some of the root cause of inequality and economic exclusion. And a lot of it tracks back to an inequality in income that then leads to the inequality in health outcomes. And part of that is around jobs and around fair work, as opposed to just any job. It has to be a good job, and good jobs are good for health, and good health is necessary to enter and sustain good employment as well. It was interesting to hear inclusive growth and the lack of connectivity with public health or health, and can I just say that that is high on our agenda in terms of inclusive growth. As you probably know, there are a number of city deals, growth deals, different names of deals across the country, mainly focused on improving the local economy, and within that there is now an inclusive growth element. For some of the earlier deals, the health aspect hasn't been as front and centre as I think it has to be, and the reform process will enable it to be. I think we have to look at how we embed health and well-being as a cross-cutting outcome, and I think good employment has to be a health outcome, and good health has to be part of an employment outcome. I think if we don't have a shared outcome at the outset, then we won't necessarily get to the end destination that we have an aspiration to get to, because what gets counted and measured gets done. And I think within the vision, it's quite clear that it's a more holistic health and well-being. I think I'm also keen to look at how we can get to a better whole system, whole person approach. We know within our localities that 20% of our residents normally use 80% of the public resource, and we know that we operate in silos a lot of the time. And again, if we can have an unintended consequence of a more connected system, a better aligned and integrated system, we have the socio-economic duty, we have the child poverty action plan, we have a number of levers and enablers, and I think we have an opportunity to look at how we join this up under the inclusive growth banner and have quite clear outcomes in terms of inclusive growth that we can actually measure and measure the distance travelled. So I'm looking forward to this journey that we're embarking on to have a more cross-cutting approach. And I'm also keen to have non-health professionals looking at public health, and I welcome health professionals looking at economic development so that we can understand a lot more about our dual roles, because I think a lot of it depends on a better understanding and a better appreciation, because unless we get under the skin, we don't necessarily understand the challenges, and therefore we don't know what the potential solutions might be. So that's really from my perspective on economic development what I want to encourage our colleagues. And we have an inclusive growth workshop on Thursday, and Evelyn McHugh and Mark are coming to talk about health as part of that inclusive growth, alongside the Equalities and Human Rights Commission on tackling equality and inequality as well. So hopefully if we can start to embed some of that, we can start to see some progress.
Thank you, Pamela. I'm going to ask, I think, Jim, head of planning, to follow.
Okay. I suppose from a planning perspective on today, a lot of the elements that you see within the priorities can already feature in local development plans and the policies within those plans. I think a lot of the issues then are how much weight are given to those policies in relation to the priorities around jobs and housing. So if we have developments coming forward for, say, 500 houses, it doesn't quite meet the active travel network that we're looking for, or the green networks, or the open space that you expect from a public house, but it's 500 houses. For a planning authority to turn that down, they need an exceptionally strong policy basis for that, and they need the confidence that when it goes to appeal, that that policy basis is backed up by national planning frameworks, Scottish planning policies, and therefore the reporter in the DPEA takes the same approach. And I think that's a real difficulty around it. I think going forward, you can speak to your planners now, so any community planners, NHS partners, police, fire that haven't sat down and spoken with their local development plans team about how their service is going to look over the next 15 years and what the local development plan can deliver in relation to infrastructure or spatial planning that will reduce the demand on their service, should go and knock on their door tomorrow. We're very fortunate in Murray. We have an exceptionally good relationship with Grampian NHS. We've planned out health infrastructure in terms of GPs, dentists, chairs, etc. for all the growth areas in Murray for the next 20 years. We're taking money for the health board towards those towards that infrastructure need through developer obligations, and we sat down with the health board and the IJB and talked around long-term service change. So people staying in the homes longer, how many more accessible homes do we need to put into our policies in the future? Do we need fibre to all the premises to work with digital health? How does the Internet of Things come into handling things like dementia? Can we use colour or the character of areas to reduce service demand and keep people in the area longer? And they're the conversations that you should all be having with your local planners. And that doesn't need public health reform. That can happen now. So that's the first thing. Second thing is about strengthening the case within planning. So that needs to be embedded in the national planning framework, Scottish planning policies, and economic development and inclusive growth, as was said. And third thing is resource. When you look at some of these interventions, particularly around the transport, active travel, as Ben mentioned this morning, some of those smaller interventions that need to happen just to make developments work and reduce the impact on some of the other areas out with those growth sites, the money's just not there. So if you take Elgin as an example in Murray, we subsidise every new house by £8,000 to pay for the road, health and school infrastructure that housing site can't afford. The housing site wouldn't be viable and it wouldn't happen without it. So if you're adding additional requirements to satisfy public health needs around active travel and green networks, it makes the development even more unviable, and therefore it needs to be resourced some other way. So that has to be funding into local government to resource this.
Thank you. And let's go with Alan.
Okay, thank you very much. From an environmental health perspective, or society perspective, I think what I would say is that environmental health is linked and wholly signed up to the public health priorities that have been set. We're actively engaged in the process, and we would also thank Scottish Government and COSLA for inviting environmental health to the table, because I think for the first time it's given the profession a policy link with at a national level, rather than trying to say how do we link into economic development, how do we link into community planning, how do we do that. I think from a society perspective we see that creating a holistic approach to health and safety, to public health is the way forward. I think the challenge is getting local authorities to recognise that they do have a role in public health. I think we had a question earlier to ask what role does planning have in public health. I think local authorities have a role, whether not as planning, whether not as advice services, whether not as debt, all these sorts of things. It's got a core role to public health, and I think we need to recognise that. From an environmental health perspective, we have produced a paper on how we believe we link to a public health agenda and what we do that others can't do. And we've got good links with business, with the public, with other regulators and agencies. I think we're the only agency that are out there who engage with 30,000 businesses every year. And you think about the potential that creates in terms of giving advice in terms of diet, obesity, health and safety, food safety, protecting the environment. So it's a clear role for environmental health in this public health agenda. I think there are challenges we're trying to address from it on the basis that the budget position across environmental health probably similar to other unprotected services. 16% reduction in budgets over the last 6 years, 25% reduction in qualified environmental health officers. So we are working with COSLA and the Improvement Service in the Scottish Government to try and look at workforce development so that we have got the workforce in place for the future challenges that we need to make, and I think that's been positive. Challenges I think that exist are probably corporate leadership and change of culture at a council level, but also with other partners that we work with, because it can't be a situation that it's only the council and the Health Protection Scotland that deliver public health. It's got to be led by communities and individuals, and we need champions to champion the public health sort of side. The other risks I have, or we've identified, is we need to build on one another's strengths and respect and recognise everyone's roles. I think this is not about Health Protection Scotland taking over the role of local authority, but we should be looking at the framework in terms of how we can work better, how do we report the outcomes, and more importantly, I think, how do we put resources to activities where the benefits are not short term. So if you're looking at longer term improvements, how can you get local authorities and others to accept the risk that we will put resources to that activity, whereas we may not beat our performance measures for next year, but the longer term benefits are there. And I think that's a key risk. Probably in conclusion, I would say that the society are supportive of this and obviously want to work hard to try and deliver with partners.
Great, thank you. Just squeeze up a wee bit, I'm afraid.
Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to stand. I've got a sore back, so it suits me. Do shout if you can't hear me. So I've been in. Oh, that's grand. Thank you. I've been integration manager in Midlothian for the last 5-6 years, and I've had a really rewarding time. I think there's a great deal of overlap between the integration agenda and the material that I've been hearing today in terms of the public health agenda. We've spent a lot of time looking at structural issues between health and social care, but it's gone much wider than that in terms of developing partnership working. Similar theme to what I've heard throughout today. The voluntary sector, housing, community planning more generally have been crucial to our ability to deliver on our agenda. I think in terms of the priorities for the IJB, clearly there is a need to look at the actual delivery of health and social care services, but our brief has been to reshape health and care to make them sustainable in the longer term, and that has required us to look ahead in terms of prevention, addressing inequalities, just the kind of material that's been spoken about today. So other than early years, I think within Midlothian we could take the other 5 priorities that have been identified in the public health agenda and say they're ours as well. So I think from an IJB perspective, it's knocking at an open door. In terms of structure, we already have, through our chief officer, having a foot in both health and social work. The chief officer sits at the council senior management team, so you've got that direct link between, it's not formal in terms of organisational structure, but your lead health person in Midlothian is sitting at the council directors' tables. There's that direct influence there. And on the other side of the coin, you've got elected members who have a direct interest and influence over the health agenda that wasn't there in the past. So I feel optimistic. Clearly finances are extremely tight and it puts the prevention agenda on the back foot a bit, but I think the IJB, certainly in Midlothian, recognises that to do its business it has to think ahead and it has to take on prevention and inequalities as its core priorities. And fundamental to that, as we were talking at our table earlier, is a comprehensive public engagement strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. Great, thank you. Guys, I was just reflecting as you all spoke, that felt like a kind of average day at work for me. Genuinely, it did. You could have been all of my kind of colleagues, and actually we probably would have, in having that daily conversation, we wouldn't have said we were having a public health conversation, we'd have just been saying we were having a conversation. But today just, I think, has kind of brought out about language, hasn't it? And I kind of thought, well done, Alan, for kind of being brave a wee bit there about just calling out what I think Paul described around that some people might view this as, in the reform, some challenge, and about, you know, where workforces is going to sit. But if we can call things out in the way that you did, and It's not about one organisation taking over. I think that will go a long way to helping to deal with any anxiety. So thank you for calling that out in the way you did. I'm going to take it all back to the ranch as adding to my day job team. Anyway, over to you. I'm going to invite you, give you the opportunity to engage in a dialogue, really different perspective sitting at the table here. So opportunity for you to pose anything, comment on anything the guys have said. Everybody's getting tired. Shall I do one while you give some thought? I'll wait on a hand. I just wondered if we should just try and unpack the wee bit about workforce a wee bit more, and I guess that Alan started to get into that. What do you see as, this is just a question, what do you see as the kind of genuine workforce opportunities for us as a kind of whole public health community going forward? And I'm going to pose that question to, I'm going to go for planning on that one, I think. Jim?
Yeah, to some extent I'll echo what Alan said about the difficulties with resources and workforce, in that everybody in the public sector has the same difficulty. We're all looking at cuts and therefore reduced workforces over the future. If I look across, I'm responsible for a number of services, but if I look across them all in those professional services, whether it's planning or environmental health, building standards, we've all got the same challenge of recruiting staff. Whenever we do have vacancies, we have to look at the system of doing that, and certainly look through some of the modern apprenticeships and graduate apprenticeships ways, and how we can bring staff, particularly local young people, and try and bring them into the council so we can keep them in the council. As a rural authority, we've got a big issue with people leaving the area and not coming back. So I think there's quite a wide range of activities we need to look at there in terms of developing the workforce. In terms of developing the workforce for public health and planning, I think the existing workforce already has a considerable knowledge around the sorts of activities that contribute to public health, and they're already embedded in a lot of their policies, but it's really getting the policy right at Scottish Government level and therefore local development plan level that gives the strength of argument to make sure that those policies stick when you're faced with difficult decisions and compromises.
I don't know if you were in the room when the colleague from Scottish Borders, the Director of Public Health, this morning was describing how he has pinched the toolkit that's been developed by Public Health down south to make sure that all policies are health orientated. In the planning world, of which you have no shortage of policies, what would be your view on the fitness generally of the policy, environment and planning in terms of that public health test? Do you think they are fit?
I think they're not too far away. They can always be improved upon. A lot of it's about evidence base, and if you look down in England, there's a lot of that evidence base has been gathered, and some up here. So I think there is evidence to support the policies. If you're really tackling public health reform and addressing it across the silos, then you need to build up the evidence base in each silo, and that then starts to inform policy and really starts to make a difference. So there's always more to do and there's always more to learn, and we can always strengthen it. But I think planning as a whole, in terms of policy and understanding, the basics are there, but I would never say that you can't do more and develop more, particularly if you get that wider engagement across the whole sector.
Great. Anybody else want to come in on the workforce point? No. It was just to pick up the point about the impact. Just to pick up the point about the impact and how you ensure that your policies have taken due regard of inequalities. Evelyn came along to our last community planning network meeting to talk about the whole systems approach, and following on from that we were looking at the Fairer Scotland duty, and the majority, if not all, of the community planning partnerships, councils and health boards were looking at developing their impact assessment toolkits for equalities to include inequalities to meet the Fairer Scotland duty. And certainly in Dumfries and Galloway we have a generic toolkit that includes social sustainability, includes environmental sustainability, and the Health Board, Third Sector and ourselves as Council all use the same toolkit. And that has given us quite a strong approach to ensuring that all our policies are being assessed in the same way, that the stakeholder groups from tackling poverty and equalities are very familiar with the toolkit, and so the dialogue is much richer than perhaps it would otherwise be if it was an officer just looking at one narrow area. So that broader focus and assessing impact of your policies is certainly something that I think across the board we're all looking at. Questions?
It's like the Billy Connolly, nobody wants to actually leave in case I shame them as they just sneak out the side there. Peter Kay does that too as well. I think there was a hand up there and then I've got one here. Great, thank you. One at the back.
You go first, Andrew. Sure. Yeah. Alistair's pointing to you.
Okay, great.
Okay. Andrew Fraser, Director of Public Health Science. I mean, I haven't seen an array of people such as yourselves talking about public health for forever, really. And it's very welcome to be in this room along with local authority colleagues. And I would add only one leadership discipline you have to the one that's already there, because I was at a meeting last year about housing, and it was very well attended and it was very well informed about public health. And midway through the discussion section, a guy said at the back, "Where have you been for the last 40 years?" And I do get this sense, listening to the panel here, especially around economic development and measurable things and common aims, that we need to answer that challenge. And I suppose the question to you is, how do we get closer? If we're not one of you, in terms of being in the council, a couple of us are, Tim Patterson is an example, how do we get closer? What would it take for us to be closer to colleagues like you, to have that sort of influence and enrich your discussions and inform your decisions, so that we all get what we want? Is a shared objective, that we want the same things, and I think we've got to realise that, no matter the pain we might go through and the odd storm in our relationships, but we've got to build that. How do we do it?
Andrew, thank you for that question. Let's start at the top and we'll give each of the panels one thing that you can suggest. Pamela, we'll start with you.
So, I think there has to be better skills utilisation, and whether we do it formally or informally around sharing staff who have a lot of knowledge and experience, but the staff often silo work, and I don't think we utilise sufficiently their skills, knowledge and experience, because you're normally representing one area of interest or one view of the world, and if you had more of a shared view, so whether it's secondment, job rotation, I think there is a need to get underneath the skin of each other's organisation and not just sit in that forums or groups, but actually to experience it and to be able to influence and shape from within. That would be my take on how we understand more about each other.
Alan?
I think I would say the key is partnership and innovation. I think looking at it, we need to speak the same language. I think people get confused about public health, health improvement, health protection, and whatever else you use. And I think one language, one message, and look at innovative ways of delivering that. I think, and an issue I think we all have is it's easy to engage with audiences who want to engage with you. As a regulator, it's easy to engage with people who don't want to engage with you because you can't shut you out. But I think it's always hard to reach target groups that we all struggle with. And there's maybe a way in thinking that there's got to be an agency out there working in the public health field that are engaging with the elderly in our communities, people, and can they give one message, and not only their own agency message, but can they give a message rolling into a holistic public health perspective.
Great, thank you. Liz?
I think simply involvement.
Think simply involvement is the message at every level, and the LOIPs have certainly ensured that there has been public health contributions throughout their development, and at strategic, thematic and local groupings that we involve public health colleagues in developing the strategic plans as well as the day-to-day delivery. And in the same way that Midlothian has the Health and Social Care Chief Officer is a member of the Council's management team, and we have a number of training activities like in engagement where public health colleagues are part of that same group. So it's simply about making the connections and involving people at every level.
Yeah, I suppose I think across the public sector we're always firefighting rather than perhaps thinking strategically in our day jobs, and it's taking that time to step back. To me, collaboration is now a necessity, working in partnership is now a necessity, and we need to find out ways of how each other's services can benefit and reduce service demand in the future. And the first step I would encourage you all to do is, if a planner knocks on your door and asks to speak about the local development plan, give him some time in your diary. And equally, when you go back to your desk, think about what your service might look like in 15 years and go and knock on your local planner's door and ask for time in his diary. And I think that's the pragmatic way, that first step, knock on the door, start the conversation.
Thank you.
Paul, the speaker earlier today, spoke about public services all sharing that desire to do the right thing for their communities, the health and well-being of their communities. I believe that's the case, and I think what we struggle with is making good connections with one another, finding that shared territory. So for me, it's about making relationships, networking. You can put in all the structures in the world, you can have clear plans and guidance, but it's around building, for me, it's around building up relationships and getting things done together.
Andrew, that was a really provocative question. Thank you for asking that. And a colleague at the back of the room.
This works now, yeah. I was struck by the earlier piece of the conversation about staff development and learning, and I'd be keen to hear what each of the panel thinks we could do to enhance pre-entry to the professional occupations across the disciplines that we have in the room today and the public health workforce more generally. Because we start from a position that we're all trained in one occupation, and therefore we're in a position of not understanding other occupations because we're trained in silos. So what would we do to change the training in silos, and how would we continue that throughout staff development once people are qualified?
Great, thank you for that question. I'm going to start with you, Tom, this time.
I think, again, I'll stand up. I think one of the things we've made a bit of progress with in Midlothian is moving towards the kind of, somebody referred earlier to the whole person approach. I think we are rolling out that, having a good conversation, learning what's important to the individual and responding to that. And sometimes that response will be something that member of staff can deal with directly, but sometimes it's around knowing the infrastructure of services around them and being able to point them in the right direction, rather than that's not my business. So I think we've got staff involved in doing that through what's called our Wellbeing Project, but we are rolling out the good conversation training to a whole range of staff, social work staff, GPs, etc. So that would be my response.
Jim, planners of the future, what are they going to look like?
Well, I'm an environmental health officer, so should I say I started out as a trainee environmental health officer many years ago, and I think your question reflects to me, even more so now, what modern workforce has to be agile and flexible, and they have to be able to move across professions and look at different opportunities. That's something they are being taught through schools at the moment, to look at their career as possibly a series of jobs rather than an individual profession. I think within the workplace ourselves, it's about giving our colleagues the opportunity to explore other aspects of the work within our services. So certainly from my own staff point of view, I encourage them to get involved in the national bodies. I encourage them to get involved in other services and projects across the council, because it's a way of learning and generating that shared experience. And I think the workplace has to change to adapt to that, and individuals, I think, naturally coming forward will be looking for more of that in the future.
Great, thank you. Liz?
I think there's two elements to that. One is about awareness, and certainly at our table we were talking a lot about culture change and about the need for people to work through what the changes mean for them. So there's certainly an awareness programme across all the partners. And then the second element is about skills development, and increasingly the need for people to understand how you engage with communities, how you engage with individuals. And I think we've all come quite a long way with that. And there are existing sort of professional staff, community learning and development staff who have got these skills in public health, in local government, in the third sector, and indeed in a number of community groups. And so some of that is about knowing where that is and harnessing that so that the right staff have got the right skills.
Alan?
I think there's probably two issues I would say. One, I don't think you'll ever get away from the fact that you've got professional qualifications, and you need officers to go through that professional qualification or criteria. But I think also there's a need to review the framework of that. I know in terms of environmental health, there's a scheme through the Royal Environmental Health Institute of Scotland, so you've got graduates, and then you do minimum 48 weeks practical training, and then you sit your diploma before you can get let out loose. But I think the reality is that there is a specific module based on public health, and the important thing is that that's reviewed and kept up to date, so you know who the public health partners are and what the roles are. The other thing is obviously to look at part and parcel of that is integrated training. I think environmental health officers at the moment do spend some time with NHS, CPHN units and vice versa to get a better understanding of how that linkages work, and that is probably something we need to go further once this holistic approach to public health comes out. And the third one I would say is each organisation, I think, has got a corporate responsibility to their own staff about their development, how they operate. So they may be qualified when they come through your door, but you need to speak to them about the corporate culture, how you work in partnership, who your partners are, how you work in your communities, what your enforcement ethos is in terms of that sort of side. And the other thing is that I think environmental health are well linked in terms of partners. A lot of people come to us because nobody else can help, but they don't know where else to go. But there's clear partnerships there in terms of serious and organised crime, who are working with a lot of different agencies, empty homes policies, community planning groups. So I think it's about bringing that sort of culture into the profession and being inclusive.
I was thinking we could maybe look at some kind of cross-cutting module that was around the public sector duty, and that there were public sector competencies aligned to that, and you could look at it within the socio-economic duty. We spoke about equality and poverty impact assessments, etc. You could actually frame more of a public sector duty type competence, and it could be cross partnership CPD, you know, if you get enough public sector buy-in to that kind of module.
Curious about why you posed the questions and what your own thoughts were. Do you want to share your own thinking with us?
Well, I recall training as a community worker in Murray House in days gone by when it was still gaslight, and we were part of a school of community studies along with social work colleagues, and it was really valuable for us to have that time with professionals in another occupation where we share perspectives about the delivery of public services. And if we're serious here about wanting a cultural change and not a structural change simply, then we need to understand each other better and understand the resources that we can call on in just the way I've heard the panel describing. It's very encouraging, but I do think that needs to go back to pre-entry training as well as to post-entry training. We now have a situation where training is still very much siloed in our universities. We have universities that have stopped doing training in some of those core professional areas, so community learning, which is the new name for my professional occupation, is no longer delivered in at least one of the 3 universities that used to deliver that course. And yet it's the skill set that people are asking for more and more in terms of those skills around engagement and public participation and community empowerment. So I'd like to see us talking to universities about those core public sector skills that we need to share and bringing disciplines and training together. So there's a module within your training, pre-entry training, everybody has to be looking at how public services work with communities now.
Great, thank you for that. I have to say I kind of share your own view. If we project ourselves forward 10, 15 years and our successors, they will look and feel very different, and it won't be about being attached to one single sector or one single institution. And I think as part of the digital agenda, some of what we've been coached in by way of professional development, those skills get taken care of through digital solutions as well. What you like to think, what required at the back of that is basic humanity and public value and public service. And so there is something about finding that back, isn't there? And that ultimately everything we spoke about today is about caring for a place in a people. Some of that needs a whole suite of generic skills which are about care. And some of them then need specialists. And sometimes I think what we've done is we've put specialists with that specialist knowledge before some of that kind of basic care that any one of us should be capable of. So I certainly think it will have to be a core plank of the agenda going forward from a public sector reform, notwithstanding within the context of here. So thank you for you and Andrew raising the points that you made. I think they're helpful for those of us that are sitting on the oversight board in particular, to start to think about some of the things that we've spoken about today. It's always a kind of formidable thing to sit in front of your peer group, so well done to the panel members for, I don't know if you were volunteered or you're coerced, whichever it was. Thank you for agreeing to come onto the panel, so please join me in thanking them.